Amelia Carter stood in the middle of her art gallery, the soft lighting casting a warm glow over the various paintings and sculptures that adorned the walls. It was a special night, the opening of her latest exhibition, Whispers of the Soul. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched the guests marvel at the art, sipping wine and engaging in animated discussions. Dressed in a sleek black dress, Amelia exuded confidence, though underneath the surface a familiar ache of loneliness lingered. At 35, she had built a life around her passion for art, but at times she wondered if there was more to life than the quiet solitude of her gallery. Her thoughts were interrupted as Ethan Monroe entered, his tall frame commanding attention. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his dark hair slightly tousled. A renowned architect, Ethan was a regular at Amelia's gallery, often finding inspiration in the art she curated. "Amelia," he greeted warmly, his eyes lighting up as they met hers. "Another stunning exhibition." "Ethan," Amelia replied, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "I'm glad you could make it." They wandered through the gallery together, discussing the pieces on display. There was an ease between them, a connection that neither could deny. As the evening progressed, their conversations grew more personal, revealing shared dreams and unspoken desires. Cracks beneath the surface. Ethan returned home late that night to a quiet house. His wife Margaret was already asleep, their once vibrant relationship now reduced to strained pleasantries and silent meals. They had been married for over a decade, and while the love was still there, the spark had faded. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. He thought about the evening at the gallery, the way Amelia's eyes had lit up when she talked about her art. He missed that kind of passion in his life. Margaret stirred, opening her eyes briefly. "Long night?" she asked, her voice laced with fatigue. "Yeah," Ethan replied softly. "The exhibition was wonderful." Margaret nodded, already drifting back to sleep. Ethan lay down beside her, his mind swirling with thoughts of Amelia. New horizons. The following week, Amelia met Isabelle Bennett, a new neighbor who had recently moved into the apartment above her gallery. Isabelle was a writer drawn to the city's vibrant art scene in search of inspiration for her next novel. They quickly became friends, bonding over their shared love for creativity. Isabelle often visited the gallery, finding solace in its serene ambience. She admired Amelia's dedication and found herself inspired by her friend's passion. One afternoon, as they sipped coffee in the gallery's small cafe, Isabelle confided in Amelia about her struggles with writer's block. "I feel like I've lost my voice," Isabelle admitted, staring into her cup. "Every time I try to write, the words just don't come." Amelia placed a comforting hand on Isabelle's. "Maybe you just need a new perspective. Sometimes inspiration comes from the most unexpected places." As the weeks passed, Ethan and Amelia found themselves drawn to each other. Their meetings became more frequent, often under the guise of discussing art and architecture. They shared lunches and late-night phone calls, their conversations filled with laughter and a growing sense of intimacy. One evening, after a particularly emotional discussion about their unfulfilled dreams, Ethan leaned in and kissed Amelia. It was a moment of weakness, a culmination of their unspoken feelings. They both knew it was wrong, but the pull between them was undeniable. Amelia pulled away, her heart pounding. "Ethan, we can't do this." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice filled with regret, "but I can't seem to stay away from you." They stood in silence, the weight of their actions pressing down on them. Despite their resolve, they knew this was only the beginning of a complicated and dangerous affair. Amelia tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. She felt guilty, not only for betraying Margaret, but also for hiding the truth from Isabelle. Her friendship with Isabelle had become a source of comfort, and she didn't want to jeopardize it. Meanwhile, Isabelle began to notice subtle changes in Amelia. She seemed distracted, her usual enthusiasm dampened. Concerned, Isabelle decided to confront her friend. "Amelia, is everything okay?" Isabelle asked one afternoon as they sat in the gallery. Amelia hesitated, torn between her desire to confide in Isabelle and the fear of losing her friendship. I'm just dealing with some personal issues, she finally said. It's nothing to worry about. Isabelle nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As she left the gallery, she resolved to find out what was troubling Amelia. Amelia sat alone in her gallery late one evening, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the room. She had told herself countless times that she needed to end whatever was starting between her and Ethan, but the pull she felt toward him was too strong. Her phone buzzed and she saw Ethan's name on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "I need to see you," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "Can I come over?" Amelia's heart raced. She knew she should say no, but the longing in his voice mirrored her own. "Okay," she whispered. When Ethan arrived, they stood facing each other, the air between them thick with tension. Without a word, he pulled her into an embrace, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. In that moment, all the reasons why they shouldn't be together faded away. Their affair had begun. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Amelia and Ethan were careful to keep their affair hidden, but the weight of their deception began to take its toll. Amelia found it increasingly difficult to face Isabelle, who continued to confide in her about her writing struggles. Each conversation felt like a reminder of her betrayal, and the guilt gnawed at her. Ethan, too, was struggling. His marriage to Margaret had always been complicated, but now it felt like he was living a double life. He knew he was hurting her, even if she didn't yet know the full extent of his betrayal. One evening, as Ethan sat in his office, Margaret knocked on the door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. Ethan nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "Of course." Margaret sat down, fidgeting with her hands. "I feel like we've been drifting apart. Is there something going on?" Ethan hesitated, torn between the truth and the lie. "Work has been stressful," he said finally. "I'm sorry if I've been distant." Margaret looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "I just miss us." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of his deceit pressing down on him. "I miss us too." Isabelle sensed a change in Amelia, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Her friend seemed more guarded, as if she was carrying a burden too heavy to share. One afternoon, Isabelle decided to surprise Amelia at the gallery. She brought a bouquet of flowers, hoping to lift her friend's spirits. But when she arrived, she found the gallery empty. Curious, Isabelle wandered through the space, her footsteps echoing off the walls. In the back office, she found Amelia's phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Ethan. Isabelle's heart sank as she read the message. "I can't stop thinking about last night. I need to see you again." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Amelia and Ethan were having an affair. That evening, Isabelle confronted Amelia. The gallery was closed and they were alone, the tension between them palpable. "I know about you and Ethan," Isabelle said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Amelia's face went pale. "Isabelle, I can explain—" "Explain what?" Isabelle interrupted, her voice rising. "That you're betraying Margaret? That you've been lying to me?" Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "But you did," Isabelle said, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "You hurt me. You hurt Margaret. How could you?" Amelia broke down, sobbing. "I don't know. I felt something with Ethan that I haven't felt in a long time. It was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself." Isabelle shook her head, the pain evident on her face. "I trusted you, Amelia. I thought you were my friend." "I am your friend," Amelia pleaded. "I made a mistake, but I care about you. Please don't let this ruin our friendship." Isabelle turned away, her heart heavy. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Ethan's world began to crumble as well. Margaret had become increasingly suspicious, sensing that something was amiss. One evening, she confronted him directly. "Are you having an affair?" Margaret asked, her voice steady but filled with pain. Ethan froze, the question hanging in the air. He wanted to deny it, to protect her from the truth, but the guilt was too much to bear. "Yes," he admitted softly. Margaret's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you? I'm sorry, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. Margaret shook her head, her heart shattered. I need time to think, she said, grabbing her coat and walking out the door. Left alone, Ethan felt the weight of his actions crash down on him. He had betrayed the woman he had promised to love and protect, and now he was left to face the consequences. Isabelle retreated into herself, the betrayal from Amelia cutting deep. She poured her emotions into her writing, using the pain as fuel for her creativity. Slowly, she began to find her voice again, though the wounds in her heart remained raw. Amelia, on the other hand, struggled to navigate the fallout of her actions. She tried to reach out to Isabelle, but her calls went unanswered. The gallery, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison, filled with memories of what she had lost. Ethan, too, was facing the wreckage of his life. Margaret had moved out, leaving him to grapple with his guilt and loneliness. He knew he needed to make amends, but he didn't know where to start. The days following the confrontation were difficult for everyone involved. Amelia threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the reality of her fractured friendships. The gallery, once a place of joy and inspiration, now felt like a hollow shell. Isabelle avoided Amelia, opting to focus on her writing instead. The betrayal had reignited her creativity, but it also left her feeling isolated. She poured her pain into her novel, channeling her emotions into every word. Ethan, meanwhile, was left alone in the house he had once shared with Margaret. The silence was deafening, and he struggled to cope with the emptiness. He missed his wife, missed the life they had built together, but he knew he had no one to blame but himself. One afternoon, Isabelle was sitting in a local cafe, her laptop open in front of her, when she saw Margaret walk in. There was a moment of hesitation before Isabelle waved her over. Margaret, looking tired but composed, accepted the invitation. They sat in silence for a while, both sipping their coffee before Margaret finally spoke. I guess you know, Margaret said quietly. Isabelle nodded. I found out a few days ago. Margaret sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know what to do. I love him, but I don't know if I can forgive him. I know the feeling, Isabelle replied. Amelia was my friend, and she lied to me. It's hard to reconcile the person you thought you knew with the one who hurt you. They sat in silence again, finding an unexpected comfort in each other's company. Amelia knew she had to make things right, or at least try. She reached out to Isabelle, leaving a heartfelt message. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. You've been a wonderful friend, and I betrayed that trust. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. She also reached out to Margaret, though she wasn't sure if her apology would be welcome. She sent a letter explaining her actions and expressing her regret. Margaret received the letter but didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face Amelia, but a part of her appreciated the gesture. Isabelle finally agreed to meet with Amelia. They sat in the gallery, the atmosphere tense but civil. I'm not sure if I can forgive you, Isabelle began, but I do want to understand why. Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes filled with remorse. I was lonely. I've spent so much time building this gallery, but somewhere along the way I lost myself. When I met Ethan, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. It doesn't excuse what I did, but that's the truth. Isabelle nodded slowly, absorbing Amelia's words. I can understand loneliness, but it doesn't justify the hurt you caused. I know, Amelia said softly. I'm truly sorry. Margaret also agreed to meet with Ethan. They sat in the park, the crisp autumn air filling the space between them. I read your letter, Margaret said, and I appreciate your apology, but I need to know if you're truly sorry or if you're just trying to ease your guilt. I'm truly sorry, Ethan replied, his voice filled with emotion. I made a terrible mistake and I've hurt you deeply. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret every moment of it. Margaret studied him for a long time before nodding. I need time, Ethan. but I'm willing to try to work through this. Amelia and Isabel began to rebuild their friendship, though it was a slow and cautious process. They both knew that things would never be the same, but they were willing to try. Isabel found solace in her writing, her novel taking shape as she worked through her emotions. Amelia focused on the gallery, finding a renewed passion in her work. Ethan and Margaret began attending couples counseling, hoping to mend the fractures in their marriage. It was a difficult journey, but they both wanted to find a way back to each other. Months passed and the wounds began to heal. Isabel's novel was published, receiving critical acclaim. She dedicated it to those who find strength in the face of betrayal. Amelia's gallery flourished, becoming a beacon of art and community. She found a new sense of purpose, embracing the lessons she had learned. Ethan and Margaret, though still healing, found a renewed connection. They knew it would take time, but they were committed to rebuilding their relationship. The months following the confrontation had been difficult for everyone involved. While Amelia and Isabel had begun to rebuild their friendship, there were still moments of tension, especially when the subject of Ethan came up. Isabel's wounds were still fresh, and Amelia was haunted by the guilt of betraying her friend. One evening, as Amelia walked through the gallery, her thoughts weighed heavily on her. She had grown to value Isabel's friendship once again, but it wasn't the same. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Amelia stood before a large canvas, its abstract strokes a blur of emotions she couldn't articulate. Her own pain and regret spilled onto the canvas, yet she found solace in the process. Suddenly her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Ethan. "Amelia," Ethan's voice came through the phone, hesitant but clear. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us." Amelia felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Ethan, I don't think we should talk about this anymore." "I know," he said softly, "but I need to tell you something." Amelia sighed, bracing herself. "What is it?" I'm trying to make things right with Margaret. I've been working on myself, and I think we might be able to fix what was broken." A sense of finality washed over her. She had always known this moment would come, the moment when Ethan would choose his wife over her, and yet hearing it from him felt different, more real. She nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I hope it works out for you, Ethan. You deserve that." They hung up without saying much more. Amelia stood in the gallery, the silence around her all-encompassing. She realized in that moment that she had already begun to let go. Isabel, too, had started to move forward. She was no longer consumed by the bitterness and betrayal that had once ruled her thoughts. Writing had become her catharsis, her refuge, and she found a new sense of freedom in expressing herself. One afternoon, as she met with her publisher to discuss her book's success, Isabel's mind wandered briefly to the past. She thought about Amelia, about the betrayal, and about the slow process of forgiveness. It hadn't been easy, but she was healing. "Your book's getting great reviews," her publisher said with a smile. "Have you thought about writing a second one?" Isabel laughed, the weight lifting off her shoulders. "I'm still processing the first one, but I'm open to the idea." It was in these moments, small as they were, that Isabel realized she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. She had come out on the other side of the pain, and while the scars would always be there, they no longer defined her. Ethan and Margaret's journey toward healing had been anything but smooth. Therapy sessions were grueling, and there were many nights when Ethan wondered if they could ever fully recover. But both of them had committed to making it work, and that commitment was the thread that kept them together. One evening, after a particularly difficult counseling session, they sat in their living room, exhausted but determined. "I know I've hurt you, Margaret," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've made mistakes and I can't take them back, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right." Margaret looked at him, her face softened by the passage of time. "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm not giving up on us, Ethan. But we need to rebuild. We can't just ignore the past." Ethan nodded, understanding. "I'll do the work, I promise." As they held each other that night, there was a glimmer of hope, a sense that while they couldn't undo the damage, they could at least move forward together. Amelia spent many nights at the gallery, working on new projects, but there was an undeniable emptiness that lingered. She had thought that time would heal all wounds, but she was starting to understand that true healing required more than just distance. It required change. One day, as she sat at her desk looking at her most recent piece, she realized something important. She needed to let go of the past. The affair with Ethan, her betrayal of Isabelle, it had all been a part of her journey, but it didn't define who she was. Amelia had spent so much of her life defining herself by her relationships with others. But now she knew she had to find her own identity, independent of the people she had once let influence her. She reached out to Isabelle again, this time with a simple message: "I'm here when you're ready." The act of reaching out was freeing, as though she was finally accepting that no matter what had happened, she had the power to shape her future. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came a sense of quiet closure. Amelia found herself reconnecting with her art, with her true passions, as she sought to heal herself. One chilly afternoon, Isabelle stopped by the gallery. She had received Amelia's message, and though their conversation was still tentative, there was no longer any hostility between them. "I've been thinking about what you said," Isabelle began, "and I want to try to rebuild what we had. It'll take time, but I think we can get there." Amelia's eyes softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Isabelle. I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm willing to put in the effort." The two women sat together, talking for hours, their laughter slowly filling the gallery once more. Ethan and Margaret's relationship was far from perfect, but they had learned to navigate their way forward. They had agreed to take things day by day, rebuilding their trust and their connection. It wasn't easy, but they were committed to the process. Amelia, Isabelle, Ethan, and Margaret had all learned painful lessons, but they had also learned the value of forgiveness, whether given or received, and the importance of self-discovery. Their paths had crossed in ways they hadn't expected, but they had all come out the other side, scarred but stronger. In the end, they realized that their lives, no matter how intertwined or complicated, were their own to shape. And as they faced the future, they knew that the journey, however imperfect, was worth it. As the months passed, the tension between Amelia and Isabelle began to ease. They continued to meet for lunch occasionally, catching up on life, but neither of them was eager to rush back to the way things once were. Trust had been fractured, and rebuilding it was a gradual process. Amelia spent more time at her gallery, working with new artists and expanding her exhibitions. Her art had taken on a deeper meaning since the affair, reflecting the complex emotions she had grappled with. She found a new sense of clarity in her work, something that had been missing before. Isabelle, on the other hand, focused on her writing. The pain she had gone through had shaped her stories in ways she hadn't expected, allowing her to delve deeper into her characters and the complexities of relationships. Her book, now a bestseller, had garnered more attention, and she was invited to speak at literary events, something she hadn't anticipated when she first put pen to paper. Despite their individual successes, there was still a feeling of unfinished business between them. Both women were careful not to push too hard, understanding that forgiveness wasn't instantaneous. Ethan and Margaret's reconciliation was slow but steady. They no longer lived in the same house. Margaret had kept her apartment, using it as a space for herself, while Ethan continued to live in their shared home. They were learning to coexist in a way that allowed each of them to heal separately, but still be a part of each other's lives. Their therapy sessions continued, and Ethan made efforts to show Margaret that he was committed to their relationship. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to make amends for his past mistakes. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset together, Margaret turned to him. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," she said quietly, "but I think we're learning how to be different, and that's okay." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I know it won't be easy." "I know," Margaret replied, "but we'll take it one day at a time." In the silence that followed, both of them realized that while they could never undo the past, they had a chance to create something new. Amelia sat at her desk in the gallery, staring at a blank canvas. She hadn't picked up a paintbrush in days, too consumed by thoughts of what had happened. The guilt still lingered, but it was no longer an overwhelming force in her life. She had come to understand that there were some things beyond her control, and the best she could do was move forward without constantly looking back. Her phone buzzed with a message from Isabelle. "I'm in the neighborhood. Do you want to meet for coffee?" Amelia smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Over the past few months, they had slowly found their way back to each other. The conversations were still cautious, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had both been through a lot, but they were willing to keep trying. "Sure," Amelia typed back. "I'll meet you at the cafe." The cafe was warm and bustling when Amelia arrived. Isabelle was sitting near the window, a book in front of her, but her eyes focused elsewhere. She looked up when Amelia entered and gave her a small smile. "Hey," Amelia said softly, sitting down across from her. "How's the book tour going?" "It's been great, actually," Isabelle replied. "I never expected this kind of success, but it's been a nice surprise. I've been traveling a lot, meeting new people, getting new ideas for the next book." Amelia nodded, a hint of pride in her eyes. "I'm really proud of you. You've worked so hard." "Thanks," Isabelle said, her smile fading slightly. "What about you? How's the gallery?" "It's good," Amelia replied, though she could hear the hesitation in her own voice. "I've been working through some things, but it's good." Isabelle set her book down and leaned forward. "I think we need to talk about something." Amelia's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure if this was the moment they'd been building toward, the conversation that would either heal or break their fragile reconnection. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions in her chest. "I've thought a lot about what happened," Isabelle began. "About you and Ethan, about me and how we got here. I'm still hurt, but I also understand why it happened. I've had my own moments of weakness, of loneliness, and I get how easy it is to lose yourself in that. But what I need to know is this. Are you truly sorry?" Amelia's throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I'm truly sorry. I've spent so much time justifying my actions, but the truth is I hurt you, and I regret that every single day." Isabelle's eyes softened, the sharp edge of her anger giving way to something more vulnerable. "I'm not sure we can ever go back to what we had, but I think I can forgive you. I need time, but I'm willing to try." A breath of relief escaped Amelia's lips, and for the first time in months she felt the weight of the past lifting, even if only slightly. "Thank you," Amelia whispered. "I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." With time, the bonds between Amelia and Isabelle continued to strengthen. Their friendship was no longer built on the foundation of shared dreams or artistic endeavors, but on the raw reality of forgiveness and growth. They found new ways to relate to each other, respecting the changes that had occurred in their lives. Ethan and Margaret, too, continued their journey of reconciliation. It was a slow process, but each day brought them a little closer to the life they had once dreamed of. They no longer took their relationship for granted, cherishing the quiet moments of connection that had once seemed so trivial. In the end, all four of them realized that healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy, complicated, and unpredictable. But as they moved forward, each of them understood one thing. No matter how broken they had felt, they had the power to create something new. And with that understanding, they all stepped into the future, uncertain of what it held, but confident that together they could face whatever came next. Spring arrived with a renewed sense of hope. The cold months of winter had allowed the characters to reflect and rebuild. Amelia had transformed the gallery into a place not only of artistic expression, but also of personal renewal. She invited local artists to showcase their work, creating a collaborative environment where healing and creativity intertwined. The first exhibition of the spring season was titled New Beginnings, an homage to the changes that had unfolded over the past months. It featured pieces that reflected themes of growth, forgiveness, and transformation. Amelia stood by the entrance of the gallery as the opening night began, watching guests mingle, admiring the art, and sharing stories. The gallery was no longer just a business. It had become an extension of herself. She was proud of what she had created and the way it had helped her reclaim a sense of purpose. Isabelle had been one of the first people to agree to collaborate. She had written a short story inspired by her own healing journey, which was displayed alongside one of Amelia's most poignant pieces. The synergy between their works felt almost like a mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through. "Your story is incredible," Amelia said to Isabelle as they stood side by side looking at the display. "You've captured the pain and the strength in a way that only you can." Isabelle smiled, her eyes reflecting the same sense of gratitude. "Thank you. It wasn't easy to write, but I felt it needed to be said. This experience has shaped me more than I realized." As the evening wore on, the two women shared quiet conversations, occasionally joining in with guests. They had become a strong, if not entirely seamless team. Though their bond was still young and fragile, it was something they both deeply cherished. Ethan and Margaret had settled into a more stable routine. Their therapy sessions had become less intense, more focused on communication and rebuilding their trust in the small things. They still had a long road ahead, but they no longer felt the weight of despair that had once suffocated their relationship. One afternoon, Margaret surprised Ethan with a picnic in the park, something they hadn't done in years. The weather was warm and the sun cast a golden glow over the world as they spread out a blanket on the grass. "I've been thinking," Margaret began, looking out at the lake in front of them, "about the future, about where we go from here." Ethan, ever the listener, turned to her with a soft expression. "I'm listening." "I don't want to rush into anything," she continued, "but I think we need to start thinking about what comes next. What do we want this relationship to look like in the future? Do we want to rebuild it completely, or do we just make it work in the here and now?" Ethan paused, his heart racing. This was the conversation he had been avoiding, the one that would shape the next chapter of their marriage. "I want to rebuild it, Margaret. I don't want to just make it work. I want to make it better. I want us to grow together, not apart." Margaret smiled, her eyes softening. "I want that too, but we need to be realistic. It won't happen overnight, but I think we can get there." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan believed her. Amelia, Isabelle, Ethan, and Margaret had all learned that healing was never a straight path. It was full of bumps, missteps, and moments of doubt, but it was also full of growth, understanding, and renewal. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Amelia's gallery continued to thrive, becoming a cultural hub for artists and creatives from all over. She found a deep satisfaction in mentoring young artists, sharing with them the lessons she had learned through her own journey. Each new exhibit was an opportunity for her to explore her own emotions and channel them into her art. Her gallery was no longer just a space, it was an embodiment of her evolution. Isabelle's career continued to rise. The success of her book led to more opportunities, but she never lost sight of her roots. She continued to write with vulnerability, channeling the raw emotions of her own experiences into her work. Though the shadows of the past would always be with her, she had learned to use them as fuel for her creativity rather than a weight around her neck. Ethan and Margaret, after months of therapy and introspection, had begun to truly rebuild their connection. They found themselves making new memories, simple, everyday moments that had once been taken for granted. Long walks, shared laughter, quiet evenings together. These were the things they had almost lost, but now they cherished them. And though their relationship was still a work in progress, both of them were willing to fight for it. As the year drew to a close, the four of them gathered at Amelia's gallery for a small, intimate celebration. It wasn't a grand event, but it was meaningful. They were there to celebrate their growth, the small victories, and the fact that they had made it through a year of turmoil and change. "I'm proud of us," Isabelle said, raising a glass. "We've all come a long way." Amelia smiled, looking around the room at the people who had once felt like strangers and now felt like family. "We've learned to face the hard truths," she said, "and we've come out stronger for it." Ethan reached for Margaret's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've learned that love isn't just about passion or perfection," he said. "It's about choosing each other every day, no matter the obstacles." Margaret nodded, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. "It's about being real with each other, even when it's hard." The four of them stood together, a silent understanding passing between them. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They were each in a different place now on their own paths, but the connections they had forged during their darkest hours would never fade. Amelia stood alone in her gallery that night, long after the others had left. The space was quiet, the soft light of the evening casting long shadows across the walls. She walked through the exhibits, her eyes scanning the work, taking in every detail. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. She had done the work, both in her art and in her life, and now she could look ahead without regret. The gallery door opened softly and Isabelle stepped inside, a small smile on her face. "I thought I'd find you here," Isabelle said, her voice light. "I couldn't help myself," Amelia replied, her smile matching Isabelle's. "It's been a long road, hasn't it?" "Yeah," Isabelle agreed, stepping closer. "But I think we're finally where we're supposed to be." Amelia nodded, her gaze sweeping over the gallery once more. "I think so too." And for the first time, the future felt wide open, full of possibilities, full of promise. The early days of summer were upon them, and the gallery was thriving with new visitors and returning patrons. Amelia had always believed that art had the power to heal, but now, as her walls were adorned with pieces that reflected her own growth, she understood that the healing wasn't just a solitary act. It was something shared, something others could step into and experience with her. Isabelle's success continued to snowball. She had begun work on a second novel, one that reflected the depth of her personal journey. But she was no longer the person she had been when she started writing her first book. She had learned that her strength didn't lie in her ability to hide her vulnerabilities, but in her willingness to embrace them. And now her writing reflected that newfound openness. Despite the outward progress, there were still moments of doubt. Every so often, as she sat in her office or walked through the gallery, she felt a lingering question gnaw at her, whether she had truly forgiven Ethan for everything that had transpired, and whether she could truly forgive herself. Ethan and Margaret had come to a crossroads. The months of therapy and long conversations had allowed them to rebuild some semblance of a life together, but the question still loomed. Could they ever truly erase the past? Could they move forward without the shadows of betrayal and hurt? One evening, Margaret sat across from Ethan at their kitchen table, the soft glow of the overhead lights creating a quiet intimacy between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, both of them wondering how to approach what had been weighing on their minds for weeks. "Ethan," Margaret began, her voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what we both want." Ethan put down the book he had been reading, his full attention on her. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want peace," she said quietly. "I want to know that we're in this together because we've chosen each other, not because we're afraid of being alone or because we've run out of other options." Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest, but he nodded. "I understand, and I'm not going to rush you. If we need time, we'll take it. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, ready to build a new life with you. Not just an ordinary one that's full of meaning." Margaret smiled slightly. "I believe you, but I think we need to stop looking back. We need to move forward, together, and only together." Amelia's progress in her own life had come with unexpected setbacks. Though her gallery had flourished and her friendship with Isabelle was stronger than ever, there were moments when she felt like an imposter in her own success. How could she claim to have healed when the core of her relationship with Ethan still haunted her? She had closed that chapter, but the echo of it continued to reverberate in her heart. One afternoon, as she stood before her latest painting, a swirl of deep blues and blacks with a streak of vibrant red cutting through it. She felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. The piece was meant to reflect healing, but it felt more like a cry for help. She dipped her brush into the red, almost angrily, painting over areas she'd previously defined. A knock on the door broke her concentration. Isabelle stepped into the gallery, her usual calm demeanor slightly frayed. "I've been thinking," Isabelle began, walking toward Amelia, "that maybe it's time for both of us to take a step back from everything, from the gallery, from the pressures, just a little time to breathe." Amelia set her brush down slowly, considering the offer. "You're right, but I don't know if I can walk away just yet. This place is everything I've built, everything I've fought for." "I know," Isabelle said softly, "but maybe taking a breath is exactly what you need to see it with new eyes." They stood together in silence, letting the quiet of the room settle over them. For a moment, neither spoke. They understood that both of them were facing their own personal struggles, but in that silence, there was comfort. "I'll think about it," Amelia finally said, her voice uncertain but hopeful. As the months wore on, Ethan and Margaret's relationship continued to evolve. The bond they shared was unlike anything they had known before, not because it was without flaws, but because they were willing to confront those flaws together. Every conversation, every small act of kindness, and every quiet moment added another layer to their foundation. One evening as they walked through their garden, Ethan stopped and turned to Margaret, taking her hand in his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how we need to stop looking back." Margaret looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "And?" Margaret looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "And?" "I agree," he said quietly. "But I think there's one thing we need to acknowledge before we can really move forward." Margaret's heart quickened as she waited for him to continue. "Do you remember our wedding vows?" he asked softly. "How we promised to always choose each other?" Margaret nodded, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Of course." "I haven't always kept that promise," Ethan said, his voice thick with regret. "But I want to keep it now. I want to choose you every day, no matter what." Margaret's eyes softened as the weight of his words sank in. "I believe you, Ethan, and I'll choose you too, every day." The simple exchange felt like the first step toward a new chapter, one where both of them chose to embrace the present without the weight of their past mistakes bearing down on them. Amelia and Isabel's relationship had reached a pivotal point. They had both come so far, but the final test was yet to come. The question remained, could they truly leave behind the events that had once broken them? One evening as they sat in Amelia's office, Isabelle looked at her with a quiet resolve. "I think it's time for us to talk about it, about everything." Amelia's stomach clenched. She had known this conversation was inevitable, but she hadn't expected it to feel so heavy. "You want to talk about Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabelle nodded slowly. "I need to know that you're not holding on to him anymore, that you've truly let go." Amelia looked away, her gaze drifting to the window, the evening sky painted with soft hues of orange and pink. "I've let go of the affair, of the lies. But what about all the love we shared? That's something different, isn't it?" Isabelle's heart ached at the vulnerability in Amelia's voice. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think that's the question we both need to answer. What are we going to do with all the pieces left behind?" For the first time, Amelia understood that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding a way to coexist with it. The love she had once shared with Ethan wasn't a thing to be discarded, but something she needed to make peace with. "I think we've both been trying so hard to fix everything," Amelia said quietly, her voice steady. "Maybe it's time we stop trying to fix each other. Maybe it's time we just let ourselves be who we are now." In the quiet months that followed, Amelia, Isabelle, Ethan, and Margaret began to write their own futures. Each of them had come to understand that healing wasn't a destination, it was a constant process of growth and self-awareness. Amelia spent more time with her art, no longer just as a way of expressing pain, but as a way of celebrating the complex beauty of life. Isabel's writing took on new depths as she explored themes of forgiveness and the complicated nature of love. Ethan and Margaret, though still learning, continued to choose each other every day, their connection strengthened by the honest conversations and efforts they put into rebuilding their life. The future, though uncertain, no longer felt like a burden. It was a canvas, waiting to be filled with their stories. And as the seasons changed, so did they, each of them realizing that the past, no matter how painful, had shaped them into the people they were meant to become. As autumn began to paint the world in shades of gold and amber, Amelia stood at the edge of a new beginning. The gallery, once a place of personal refuge, had evolved into a thriving cultural space, attracting artists, collectors, and curious visitors from all over. But this success, though fulfilling, had also led to a realization. Amelia could no longer define herself solely through the gallery or her past relationships. The next chapter of her life was waiting, and it was time to explore new opportunities. One evening, as she walked through the quiet gallery, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an email from a prestigious international art exhibition. They wanted her to curate a collection for their upcoming show, one that would highlight contemporary female artists exploring themes of transformation and identity. Amelia's heart raced with excitement. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. It was a chance to put her art and her vision on the world stage. But as she read the email again, a doubt crept in. Would she be able to balance the responsibilities of curating such a major event while maintaining her gallery? Could she handle the pressure without losing herself in the process? She took a deep breath, pushing the doubt aside. She had already overcome so much. This was her moment to step into the future with confidence, not fear. Isabelle, too, was standing at the precipice of something new. Her book had been well received, but it was the long hours of solitude and reflection that had led her to a realization. She no longer wanted to simply write about healing. She wanted to live it, to experience life in all its complexities and contradictions. She had received an offer to turn her book into a series for a major streaming platform, and it was tempting. But as she sat with the offer in her cozy apartment one chilly evening, sipping on her tea, she realized that the success of her book had come from her willingness to be vulnerable. Now, though, she needed to be vulnerable in a different way, not through words, but through action. She began planning a sabbatical, time away from the noise of deadlines and expectations, a year to travel, to immerse herself in new cultures, and most importantly, to connect with herself in a way she never had before. Isabelle's decision wasn't easy. It meant stepping away from her career and taking a risk. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had chosen her path, and she was ready to walk it with the courage she had found within herself. Ethan had grown into a man who no longer feared the future. He had faced his mistakes head on, and with Margaret, he had learned to embrace the imperfections of life and love. But despite their steady progress, Ethan still felt a pull toward something greater. He was ready to do more than simply exist in the safety of his repaired marriage. He began attending therapy on his own, something that was long overdue. It wasn't that he didn't want to fix his relationship with Margaret, but he realized he needed to fix his relationship with himself first. His therapist, a calm woman with an insightful gaze, had helped him explore the deeper layers of his emotions. The guilt he carried, the fear of not being enough, and his unresolved feelings about his past. He knew that confronting these was the key to becoming the man he wanted to be. Margaret had always been supportive, but there were times when Ethan felt like he was treading water in a sea of expectations, his own and others. Now, for the first time, he was learning to dive beneath the surface and understand what truly lay at the heart of his fears. The breakthrough came one evening as he and Margaret sat on the porch watching the sunset. He turned to her, his voice softer than usual. "I've been working on myself, Margaret, and I'm starting to see things more clearly. It's not about fixing the past anymore. It's about letting go." Margaret's eyes softened with understanding. "And what does that look like, Ethan?" He smiled, his heart finally feeling lighter. It looks like us here, together, with no more baggage, just us. Margaret reached for his hand, her smile warm and steady. I like the sound of that. Amelia's curatorial project for the international exhibition was a monumental success. The collection she curated was celebrated for its bold exploration of female identity, with each piece telling a deeply personal story. Amelia felt an immense sense of pride, not just in the recognition, but in the creative process itself. For the first time, she felt truly seen for her artistic vision, and it fueled her desire to push the boundaries even further. At the same time, Amelia had also chosen to take a step back from the relentless pace of her gallery. She hired an assistant manager to help with the day-to-day operations, giving her more space to focus on her art and personal growth. The decision wasn't easy. She had built the gallery from the ground up, but it felt right. One quiet afternoon, Amelia sat at her favorite cafe with Isabelle, reflecting on the journey that had brought them both here. I never thought I'd be in this place, Amelia said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I've accomplished more than I could have dreamed, but there's something about stepping back, letting go of the constant drive to be perfect. I feel freer. Isabelle smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. I get that. I've been thinking about freedom too, about what it means to live for yourself without the constant pull of expectations. Exactly, Amelia agreed. It's like we've both been running towards something, success, recognition, stability, and now we're realizing that maybe the thing we've been chasing was never the destination, it was the journey itself. Isabelle nodded thoughtfully. And now we can choose what that journey looks like. Even as they moved forward in their lives, there were still moments of doubt. Margaret had struggled with her own insecurities, wondering if she was enough for Ethan, or if their relationship was still bound by the scars of the past. But each time the doubt crept in, Ethan's support became more grounded, more unconditional. They had finally arrived at a place where their love wasn't defined by past hurts, but by shared commitment and mutual respect. There were nights when Margaret would still feel the remnants of fear, but she no longer let it control her. She would take a deep breath, remind herself of the work they had both put into healing, and move forward with confidence. Ethan, too, faced his moments of doubt. Even with his newfound sense of clarity, there were days when the weight of his past mistakes loomed large, but those days became fewer, and he learned to lean into the support of those who had become his closest allies. Most importantly, he leaned into Margaret, who had never stopped believing in their love. 1 year later, Amelia stood in front of her latest exhibit, a testament to her journey and the lessons she had learned. The walls were filled with her most personal pieces yet, each one a reflection of the battle she had fought, both external and internal. She had poured everything into this collection, and it felt like the culmination of her evolution as both an artist and a person. Isabelle was by her side, as always, offering quiet encouragement. The exhibit was packed with visitors, each one drawn to the raw emotion in Amelia's work. "This is incredible, Amelia," Isabelle said, her voice filled with awe. "You've really done it. You've captured everything. Your pain, your healing, your hope. It's all in here." Amelia smiled softly. "I didn't just capture it. I lived it." As the year came to a close, the four of them, Amelia, Isabelle, Ethan, and Margaret, gathered again. This time there were no unresolved issues, no lingering doubts. There was only the present, a place where they had all learned to live with open hearts. "We've come so far," Ethan said, raising his glass in a quiet toast, "and I think we're just getting started." Margaret squeezed his hand, her eyes sparkling with a quiet joy. "We've earned every bit of this moment." Isabelle and Amelia exchanged a look, one of mutual understanding and quiet pride. They had come together as individuals, each of them broken and uncertain, but now they were standing stronger, together. The future, whatever it held, was theirs to shape. Months had passed, and each of the characters had found themselves at a point where they could no longer ignore the call of their own growth. The paths they had chosen had led them far, but now they felt an unspoken pull to return, return to the very relationships that had once been the catalyst for their transformation. It was during a late autumn afternoon that Ethan and Margaret decided to visit the gallery again. The space had grown just as they had. The walls now contained not only Amelia's work but pieces from artists she had championed, each one reflective of the themes of self-discovery and identity that had shaped her. The light in the gallery had changed, as if it now carried the warmth of her spirit, the weight of her past struggles, and the bright promise of her future. Margaret had heard about the latest exhibit, Amelia's most personal one yet, and there was an unspoken desire in her to understand what had changed, not just in Amelia's art but in the woman who had once been her confidant. As they entered the gallery, a hush seemed to fall over the room. The soft hum of voices blended with the echo of footsteps. Amelia stood in front of her work, her expression calm, but her eyes held a quiet intensity that Margaret recognized instantly. "Amelia," Margaret greeted, her voice full of warmth, as if years had not passed. "This is beautiful." Amelia turned, her smile both welcoming and reflective. "Thank you, Margaret. It's taken time, but I think I've finally found the courage to show the world who I really am, to show the parts I've kept hidden." Ethan stood by Margaret's side, taking in the exhibition, the pieces that spoke not just of Amelia's art but of her personal healing journey. The abstract forms, the colors, there was something raw in each brushstroke, something vulnerable but empowering. He turned to Margaret. "This is incredible," he whispered. "Amelia's really grown." Margaret nodded, watching Amelia approach them. "We all have," she replied. Isabelle's journey had led her to places she had never imagined. She had spent a year traveling, immersing herself in new cultures, exploring the meaning of home and belonging. Through her travels, she had realized that the stories she wanted to tell were not confined to the pages of her books. They were in the experiences she encountered daily, the people she met, the moments of connection that were fleeting yet profound. Her sabbatical had opened her eyes to the world in ways that words never could, and when she returned home, she felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. She didn't need to rush back into another book deal, another project. She needed space to simply be. Yet, as she sat in the small cafe where she had spent so many quiet moments with Amelia, she realized that perhaps the next chapter would involve more than just travel or self-reflection. It was time for her to share her experiences, not as a writer, but as a person who had lived them. "I'm thinking of starting something different," Isabelle said to Amelia one afternoon, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "I've spent so long sharing stories through writing, but now I want to build something that allows me to connect with others, face to face. I'm thinking of starting a retreat, something that focuses on creative self-expression through travel and personal exploration." Amelia looked at her, intrigued. "That sounds amazing. You're not just writing about healing anymore, you're living it." Isabelle smiled. "Exactly. I want to help others do the same." As winter began to settle over the city, Ethan and Margaret found themselves in a new rhythm, one that felt less like a constant struggle and more like a partnership. The work they had done individually had led them to this place, but now the foundation they had built together was stronger than ever. Ethan had found peace within himself, finally free from the guilt that had plagued him for so long. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone, least of all Margaret. He had learned that love wasn't something to be earned or fought for. It was something that simply existed, waiting to be nurtured. Margaret, too, had learned the power of patience, not only with Ethan, but with herself. The journey of healing was never a straight line, but it was one they could walk together, even when the path seemed unclear. One evening, as they sat side by side in their living room watching the snowfall outside, Margaret turned to Ethan, her eyes soft. "You know, I never thought we'd make it here," she said, her voice gentle. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "Neither can I. This is where we're meant to be." Amelia's life had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. Her art had become more than just a reflection of her journey. It had become a bridge, connecting her to others in a way that words could not. As the exhibition tour continued across different cities, Amelia found herself invited to speak, to share her story, and to be a part of something much larger than herself. Her paintings now held new meaning, not just as personal catharsis, but as a representation of the power of vulnerability and growth. People who had once only seen her as a successful gallery owner were now seeing the depth of her experience, the raw emotions that fueled her work. She had found peace, but it wasn't the kind of peace she had once imagined. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the acceptance of life's complexities. She had learned that healing wasn't about erasing pain, it was about learning to coexist with it, to find beauty in the brokenness. One afternoon, after an event where she spoke about the transformative power of art, Amelia stood before her latest painting. The canvas was filled with vibrant colors, chaotic yet beautiful, like the swirl of emotions she had learned to embrace. She realized that in creating her art, she had allowed herself to heal. Isabelle, who had attended the event, came to stand beside her. "You've come so far," Isabelle said, her voice full of admiration. Amelia nodded, smiling softly. "We all have." As the seasons passed, the four of them, Amelia, Isabelle, Ethan, and Margaret, found their lives intertwining in ways they had never imagined. Their paths had all started from a place of struggle and loss, but now they were moving forward, each in their own way, with the knowledge that they didn't need to be defined by their past. Their relationships were no longer rooted in the shadows of old mistakes, but in the light of their shared growth. They had learned the art of living in the present, of embracing change and uncertainty, and of finding strength in vulnerability. One final evening, as they gathered for dinner at a small restaurant in the city, they looked around at one another, no longer burdened by the weight of their past, but united in the understanding that they had come full circle. "We've all made it," Margaret said, raising her glass. "To the journey," Ethan added, his voice steady and sure. "To the future," Amelia said, her eyes glinting with quiet confidence. And Isabelle, with a smile that spoke of both wisdom and joy, raised her glass one last time. "To us." This part concludes their story, showing how each character has come full circle in their own journey. The pain, the mistakes, the struggles, all have become integral parts of their personal evolution. Now they stand united, not as individuals defined by their past, but as people who have embraced their growth, their relationships, and their futures. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.